us in a candid moment as we just bask in that moment, that 1 second to level set. Hello, everybody. You caught us behind the scenes. Just kind of enjoying and taking a moment to soak in the moment. This has been a long time coming of sorts, this plan to bring really conscious conversations. That's another topic that I spend some time with, but around things that we know are impacting you because they're impacting us, and we're hearing some of the things that you're going through. So, thriving with real, get ready to be a part of our 3-part series that will be happening the month of December and in January, and then even more to come. So, first of all, I want to thank Janae Hicks for being here and really kicking this off. She's going to facilitate. I'm Dr. Jada, your weight loss and wellness expert, physician coach, speaker, best-selling author, and entrepreneur. I help high achieving and results-driven women to not only weigh less, but to further your success, whether it's through my medical and clinical services, through coaching, through my books, online platform, all the things, wellness retreats, so that you not only look great, but you feel better and you live life at your best. So I'm happy to bring to the stage, and without further ado, Janae Hicks, and she's going to introduce herself. And this topic, Janae, is right on time. Tell us a little bit about how you decided on this, how we decided on this, and what we can expect tonight.
Absolutely. First, Dr. Jada, it never gets old for me to hear you say all the things that you've done, right? Like, it's a thing to be able to say that you are accomplished. And I know, like, self-promotion is not something that we like to do, women like.
Right,
But when you start naming the list of the
right,
reason why you are
right.
the expert in the room, I'm like, okay, Jada, like, please show up. Hello, everyone. I am Janae Hicks, and I am so happy to be here with you all. What's important for you to know? The credentials on the screen will allow you to know that I can do this work at the highest level. So I am a nationally certified counselor. I'm a holistic person-centered therapist. I'm licensed. I am a trauma certified therapist. I'm certified in grief and loss. I work with people leaders, influencers, high performers, individuals who work in high stress industries, who are expected to perform at a very high level consistently. I believe myself to be a protector of hearts and minds. I started my career working in leadership at Morehouse School of Medicine. I learned very quickly that we didn't have a sustainable way to care for our high performers. And I decided that I wanted to be on the front line of this work. And that's what's brought me to this space. So naturally, Dr. Jada and I worked together in workplace wellness, hoping to allow people to shift their perspective and what it means to care for themselves. And so we do this work consistently. And so when Dr. Jada suggested that we do this healing series, I was like, of course, because in my space, the holiday season activates so much. So we're processing societal challenges and political divisions. And what I'm observing in this work is more isolation, more uncertainty. And I want us to normalize that it's okay to feel however we're feeling. Grief very much shows up in various ways. It affects everyone differently. We're going to move through it differently. And so I want to give you some practical tools and tips to be able to care for yourself a little better. Next slide. The conversation that we're going to have is, more importantly, the human conversation is going to be who we are as people. You can go back on, Hamza. When we step into this space, we are saying, I understand that I have credentials. I understand that I have responsibilities. I understand that there are obligations of me. But when we step into the healing space, in the therapeutic space, we're saying I am human. And as a human, I believe myself to be a woman that empowers women. I believe myself to be a fun chaser. You can never, ever, ever put a good time in front of me because I'm going to choose it. I am into coffee. I live for coffee. I'm a better human when I have coffee. I'm a wife. I've been married for 21 years. I have 2 children, and I believe myself to be in service to humanity. I also think it's important for you all to know that I am extremely extroverted. So even at 7:05 p.m., my energy is pretty high. I am curious who's in the room. I wonder if there is anyone in the virtual space, if there's anyone who would believe themselves to be an introvert. If you believe yourself to be an introvert, can you just say me or drop it in the chat? I am an introvert. I don't know if I have access to the chat. Okay, I don't know if I have access to the chat, but here's the thing. If you are an introvert, I want you to know that I come in peace. I want you to know that it is very reasonable to process your information internally and for you to take a little bit of time to understand what I'm asking of you. And so I am going to invite you to be unapologetically you. I'm going to show up unapologetically me. And together we're going to have a very thoughtful dialogue about what it means to have boundaries with love. Now, when we talk about grief and loss, there are some conversations that I want to make certain we're level setting on. Oftentimes, when we think of grief and loss, we think of death. And I'm curious what else is happening in your world. So I'm going to ask some questions. And if any of these questions resonate with you, I would love for you to drop me in the chat. I would love for you to drop a heart in the chat. I want to know what you in your individual experience you're processing through in real time. Okay. So if you have recently lost a loved one in the past year or two, I would love for you to drop in the chat me. If you've recently lost a loved one, if you're navigating grief and loss, and it has happened within the last 2 years, I would love for you to let me know. If you are caring for aging parents, I would love for you to let me know. If you have children, I would love for you to say me. If you are married, transitioning out of a relationship, partnered, I would love for you to drop a heart in the chat or say me. And if you are experiencing major transitions at work, or if you're experiencing any transitions at work, I would love for you to say me or drop a heart in the chat. It's important that when we talk about grief and loss, that we expand our understanding of what is considered grief and loss. Because during the holiday season, when you have experienced one of the things that I mentioned, there is a conversation that's happening in your internal experience that is activating every grief and loss that you've experienced. So if you recently moved, you are experiencing grief and loss. If you are navigating the intersect between professional and motherhood, there's some grief and loss in that space. If you are going through changes at work, there's some grief and loss in that space. And so I want you to know when you're feeling some type of way, when you're having the experience, that there's a reason why you're having the experience. So how do we meet ourselves with care and kindness? First, we talk about boundaries. We understand our core values. We understand and begin to talk about what it means to have healthy communication. And I'm going to talk to you all about attachment theory. I don't know if you are familiar with attachment theory. I am an origin story therapist. So I definitely believe that your origin story helps to set the tone for how you're going to love, how you're going to trust, how you're going to connect. And so I'm going to tell you a little bit more about that as we go along. So what is our collective agreement? Our collective agreement that in this space, there is no shame. It's egoless. There is no hierarchy. We're not trying to get it right. What I'm wishing for you is healing, comfort, inspiration. I'm hopeful that you can resist the urge to be performative. I'm hoping that you can resist the urge to get it right. I really want you to get curious in this space. And if you can give me an hour where you're not asking yourself to do the heavy lifting, then I think that we can get to your sweet spot and we can figure out what it means to care for yourself differently. You can go through the next 2 slides, Hamza. So I want to check in just a bit. I want you all to be honest with yourself about how you're feeling right now. I would love for you to tell me if you are doing pretty good if you're doing okay, if you're starting to struggle, if you're having a hard time. You can go to the next slide, Hamza. I'm always going to honor your adaptive strategies. Your adaptive strategies refers to the way you've learned to survive in this world. So when we talk about food as comfort during challenging times, this is an adaptive strategy. When you are over exercising, when you are punishing yourself because you ate too much, so you have to go to the gym, you have to do more, this is an adaptive strategy. When you're feeling disconnected from your body's hunger and fullness cues, this is a trauma response, an adaptive strategy. When you're overworking as a means of distraction, this is a stress response. When rumination takes over, when you can't shut down your brain, when you are procrastinating on the things that matter, these are stress responses. And I want you to be able to recognize these as we build awareness, because whether you're able to check in or not, what you're telling me is there's something else going on. And I want you to make certain that we are giving ourselves what we need and nurturing ourselves in a way that aligns with who we are. So I don't know how familiar you are with the feelings wheel, but if you have ever been in therapy, if you have ever participated in a workshop, then this handy dandy feelings wheel has been your friend. Because what the feelings wheel teaches us, it teaches us that the feelings are our internal guide. Okay. They're data points, and they allow us to know more about ourselves. They allow us to honor the pause to see which way we need to go. They tell us when something isn't right. And so I want you all to be very conscious of how you're feeling on the inside. I have a few questions that I would love for you to consider. You can answer the questions in a note to yourself. You can answer the questions in the chat. But what I want you to do is I want to invite you to explore your inner experience. The brain is usually active. And what the science supports is that the brain is only here 5% of the time. More often than not, the brain is in the present, it's in the past, thinking about what you didn't do, or it's in the future, thinking about what you should do, but very rarely are you here. And so I want to take a moment to bring everybody to this collective space. I want to ask you a few questions. I would love for you all to share collectively, but if you don't feel comfortable, I want you to answer yourself honestly. I want you to share with me, where are you putting yourself last? Where are you putting yourself last? When we're having the boundaries conversation, it's really difficult for us to talk about setting a boundary with another person when we're not setting appropriate boundaries for ourselves. And so I'm curious, where are you putting yourself last? I'm curious, where are you clinging to an expected outcome? Where are you trying to control the uncontrollable? Where are you clinging to an expected outcome? I'm curious, where do you feel like you're getting it wrong? Who are you disappointing? Where do you feel like you're getting it wrong? These are the conversations that we have in our head, but oftentimes because we are so focused on the next moment, we don't give ourselves time to process these very intense feelings, and so they show up other ways. Okay. And the conversation that we're having right now is the conversation on self-awareness. Everything begins with you. Experts in relationship science assert that the bravest, best work begins when you are able to look at yourself, understand yourself, and grow yourself. Okay. And so the conversation in relationship science is you are the prize. But oftentimes, because we're so other focused, we can't believe that we deserve the grace and kindness to prioritize ourselves. Okay. So self-awareness is the ability to say, wow, look at that thought that's showing up for me right now. Look at how I'm perceiving this situation, but I am not my thought. So you are the thinker and you're not the thought. And we'll talk about how that might present as we get into the presentation. Brave love, which is the love that I'm asking you to have for yourself, means that you're quieting the noise and clearing the clutter in your mind so that you can deepen your relationship with yourself. Okay. So as we expand our relational self awareness, we learn to trust ourselves. We learn to pay attention to all the vital data that swirls within us. And this shifts how we love ourselves, how we set boundaries for ourselves, how we honor ourselves. Okay. How's that feeling? So, where are we going? We are going to attachment theory. If you are familiar with attachment theory, I would love for you to say, I know this. If you are not, I'm going to introduce you to an explorative moment into your internal experience that I think is very, very important. Okay. Attachment theory is a psychological model that explains how people form and maintain relationships. Okay. And what's important for us to consider is that based on this idea, it affects how we connect with people. And connecting with people, because we are connected beings as humans, is the entire conversation. We want to be seen. We want to be validated. We want to feel safe. We want to be respected. And when we don't, there's going to be an internal incongruence that shows up that makes us feel some type of way. Okay. And so I'm going to introduce you all to attachment theory. I'm going to introduce you all to what it means to care for yourself different. I'm going to introduce you all to your origin story. Your origin story is your first family. So I live in an origin story. It's where all the magic happens. It's where your narrative lives. And it's something we all have in common. And so I want you to think about your first family. That's the frame that will guide this conversation. A lot of how we understand and set our boundaries come from what we have considered as normal. So think about, have you ever felt distant or strained in your relationships? It might be because you've had a hard time feeling validated in your first family. It might be that you felt dismissed in your first family. It may feel like you had to justify yourself too much, that you weren't prioritized in your first family. And when you reflect on your origin story, I want you to think about, how were boundaries presented in my family for me? And how have I brought this narrative into my current world? Okay. So remember, attachment theory is your relational blueprint. And as we get into attachment theory, there's some things that I want you all to consider. One, if you grew up in a family system with someone who struggled to emotionally regulate themselves, you may have learned to manage their emotions by withholding or neglecting your own. Okay, I want to stay here for a second. I want you to consider this because this will affect how you set boundaries for yourself. If you grew up in a family system with someone who struggled to emotionally regulate themselves, you may have learned to manage their emotions by withholding or neglecting your own. Okay, so when we think about this, I want you to think about, are you trying to fix something? The only thing we are doing right now is getting curious. So I don't want you to feel like you have to go into repair. The only thing I want you to do is consider what I'm suggesting to you and if it has validity in your world today. And then I want you to try to spend a couple of days noticing how often you're monitoring other people's emotions. So you're asking yourself, do I often ask people, are you okay? Are we making assumptions about if someone is upset with us? Are we making assumptions about how people feel about us with no evidence to support? If you are externally focused most of the time, then it's going to be hard for you to be aware of what's happening inside of you. And so again, if you grew up in a family system with someone who struggled to emotionally regulate themselves, then you may have learned to manage their emotions by withholding or neglecting your own. When we're making these small commitments towards caring for ourselves, the first thing we're doing is becoming aware. So, what happens if this is your story? As an adult, this frequently results in the belief that it's your responsibility to constantly adjust yourself to be more acceptable to others and within various systems. Okay, so if I have had to diminish myself in my first family, then I've learned that, hey, I need to be able to shapeshift. I need to adjust for everyone. I need to be other focused in order to remain connected to the people that matter to me. Okay. So this is always a little tricky because there is a conversation that we're having. What is the difference between being self focused and selfish? Okay. And so as an adult, if that was your story, then oftentimes we believe that we're being empathetic, that we are committed, that we're being kind, that we're being thoughtful. And these characteristics are all important. But what we're asking ourselves is it to my detriment? So remember, it's not your job to take on the world's problems. It's okay to notice without absorbing. So I call this observe without absorbing. It's not your job to fix everyone's life, right? And so what we're asking is, do we have the energy to help right now? We're asking, am I really supporting or am I trying to control the other person's narrative? Okay. So I want us to all do this. This is going to help set the frame for how we're going to move forward. I want you all to take about 3 minutes to see about your attachment style. There's going to be a QR code that's going to come up on the next slide. It's going to take you to a screen, and the screen is going to give you your relational blueprint. So if you've never taken an attachment quiz, this is going to help you to understand, where do I fall on the spectrum? Okay. When we talk about attachment, we're talking about secure attachment. We're talking about anxious attachment. We're talking about ambivalent attachment. We're talking about disorganized attachment. What is your relational blueprint? And it should only take you about maybe 3 minutes to complete. Once you get there, I will begin to talk to you all about attachment. It should be coming up soon. I want to remind you that this conversation is not, I am fixing myself because I am fundamentally flawed. This conversation is, I'm becoming more aware of the factors that contribute to my behavior pattern. And so that is what I want us to learn. And I want you to have enough informed information so that as you move forward in a more peaceful, integrated way, that you also have the science of healing, the science of relationships to back you up. If you feel comfortable sharing your attachment style, your dominant, whichever one gives you the highest percentage, you can drop it in the chat for me. And if not, don't worry about anything. What I want to note as we begin to go through the attachment quiz, I want you to be clear that your attachment injury is only relevant when you feel threatened. Okay. And so oftentimes when people are teaching about attachment, there's this conversation that you're always avoiding or you're always anxious. And that's not the case. When you are feeling threatened, when your internal system is telling you that maybe something isn't right, your spidey senses are online, then that protective measure that has always honored and protected you from threat, that is what's going to show up in this attachment style. Okay, I'll give you guys about 1-2 more minutes. I just want to make sure everyone has an opportunity to take their attachment style quiz. Okay, so I want to give you all a little bit of psychoeducation. I want you to understand the 4 types of attachment. We can go to the next slide. We're going to start off with this secure. Now, most people are secure, right? So the research supports that 50% of you will be secure, which means that you understand that people are going to get it wrong sometimes. You understand that relationships are going to end, that you'll be hurt by those relationships, but you'll be able to move through them. It means that you're able to honor your own needs and respect other people's needs. It means that you're pretty comfortable in commitment, that you can move in and out of commitment, that you understand that sometimes people get it wrong and that's okay, that you understand that sometimes you love and sometimes you fall out of love and that's okay. You understand that people make mistakes and you give them grace, right? So that's secure attachment. When we talk about avoidant attachment, I am an avoidant attachment, friends. So when we talk about avoidant attachment, we're talking about, ooh, I think that I want this love and it feels so good until it becomes overwhelming to my nervous system. And so what that looks like is oftentimes when it feels too much too soon, you want to pull back. This avoidant attachment from a trauma perspective, it usually shows up in the flight response. So I need to get out of there. It's taking me a long time to respond to emails. It's taking me a long time to respond to texts. I am always too busy. Work takes up all of the space in the room. This is how avoidant attachment manifests in your everyday life. You often have a tendency to dismiss emotions. Sometimes you give mixed signals. There is a fear of being hurt. So what you have said to yourself is, I'm going to get out of there before you disappoint me. Right. And it's very difficult to be in relationship with a person whose attachment injury is avoidant and is online most of the time because you aren't sure where you stand with them. Okay. Next slide, please. When we talk about anxious attachment and disorganized attachment, it talks to a different spectrum of love, right? And so anxious attachment, which is ambivalent, there is an over focus on the person. You are nervous that that person is going to leave. This attachment says that we want to make connection, and at the same time, we're afraid of losing it. And so there's a vice grip on this person or this experience when we feel threatened. So instead of pulling away, you lean all the way in. Usually this fear of abandonment shows up in this space, right? And at the same time, you tend to push your partner away. You tend to you self-sabotage in this space, because what happens is you've already set an unrealistic expectation about how they're going to show up. And then when they don't meet the demand, when they can't meet your expectations, then it feels like they have betrayed you. They are disappointing you. Okay. Disorganized is a little bit of anxious and avoidant. And so this is, I had people love me and care about me, but it wasn't consistent. And so I've learned to not get my hopes up too high. And so it's like you're waiting to be rejected or hurt. And it's almost like you're waiting to be rejected or hurt in the sense that it's like, okay, I will show you and prove myself right that you're going to disappoint me. And so within this space, there is a volatility of mood. Your moods ebb and flow. It is, I'm close, but I'm not. I'm close, but I'm not. You're ebbing and flow between this, I want to be close to you, but I'm distancing myself. And there is a difficulty with getting intimate. Oftentimes clients that I support, these are my clients that say, I haven't been able to really scratch the surface in friendships. I want to have closer friends. I want to have closer relationships. Usually they show up as disorganized in their attachment injury. So when they feel threatened, they want to connect, but it's very difficult for them to believe that the connection is real because they have been disappointed a lot. Okay. Tell me you are. Is it feeling like too much, too fast? Can you hear yourself in the attachment style? I want to make certain that it's landing for you. We can go to the next slide. So why is this important? Attachment principle teaches us that we're only as needy as our most unmet need. And this is a big deal for me because I hear all the time, like, I'm being too needy. And I'm like, well, perhaps. Or maybe that's just what you need. And being able to name our need is a thing. It is a regulatory skill set that if you are in any type of therapy, you're working on it individually, you are a self-practice seeker, or you are in space with a licensed professional, we're always trying to motivate you and invite more space for you to name your need. So you don't need a lesson on working hard. This is a big deal, especially if you are a high performer, if you're an achiever, if you work at the highest level of most fields, if you're trying really hard. I never have to try to encourage my clients to push through. I never have to encourage my clients to work hard. I never have to encourage my clients to put their head down and figure out how to get to the other side. What I do have to encourage my clients to do is to rest. I do have to encourage my clients that it's okay to balance strength and vulnerability. I do have to remind my clients that joy is possible, that they can have peace and that peace is sustainable, and that happiness doesn't have to be fleeting. When we are recovering from trauma, we are trying to open the space for you to consider, what if it all works out? So this is not a conversation of, do I have grit? No, you are gritty. Absolutely. Can you allow yourself to feel peace? Can you allow yourself to feel grounded in happiness and joy? Do you feel like it is sustainable? That's the conversation. You can go to the next slide. So, where does healing begin? Where is the conversation? What do I want you all to consider? When we're talking about secure attachment, remember it's rooted in attunement. I believe that you and I can exist in this space and we can make each other better. It's a healthy interaction. And I have the ability to be aware and effective to my needs and your needs. Okay, so I can tune into you, I can work to understand you, and I can allow space so that you can consider and care for me. That's secure attachment. If you grew up in a world where most of the time someone showed up for you consistently, then it's easier for you to believe that secure attachment is possible. If you didn't, if it was inconsistent, then your attachment injury might show up. Okay. And so what happens with avoidant attachment? Healing happens with avoidant attachment with consistent messages that their needs are important. Right. And so remember, for the avoidant attachment person, they're trying to get out of there before you disappoint them. And so they need consistent reinforcement that you are who you say you are. And avoidant attachment doesn't just show up in your personal life or your romantic life. It shows up at work too. This is the person that's like, oh no, I can't hand off this or outsource this project action to another person. They're not going to do it as well as me. Right. We don't believe that they are who they say they are unless they have done it over and over and over again. So if you recognize avoidant attachment in someone that you work with, in someone that you're in partnership with, and someone that you are getting ready to walk into your holiday circle with, I want you to remember that being steady with them, being reliable, being present can help the avoidant attachment feel safe and supported. Because remember, the attachment injury says, I don't feel safe. And so I need to protect myself from what feels threatening. Okay. For the ambivalent or anxious attachment to heal, the anxious attachment needs to recognize and feel like they can meet their own need first. So before we outsource anything to anyone else, from an anxious attachment perspective, I want you to learn to name your need. I want you to figure out what makes you happy. I want you to ask yourself thoughtfully, where is it hard to express my need and why? I want you to ask yourself, are you constantly performing in order to remain connected? And then I want you to practice self-regulation. So no, it's difficult for me to meet my need, and that's okay. If I was going to make one small change to be kinder to myself, where would I start? Right? If I wanted someone in my world to support this, who do I trust that I can begin to hold me accountable to care for myself? What does that look like? And if you fall into this organized attachment category, this is the complex attachment style, right? And so because the fight, flight, freeze trauma response is online all at one time, you are consistently hypervigilant. You are always cycling through, not sure if you should stay, not sure if you should go, or just frozen in place. Okay. And so with this, the healing begins with just awareness and validation. When do I find myself stuck? How often do I find myself stuck? How often do I find myself trying to get out of a situation because it feels threatening? How often do I find myself being anxious because I think that the person who said that they were going to show up for me may or may not show up for me. And now I find myself trying to pull them, control them, tell them what I need to the detriment of the relationship. Okay. How's that landing for you all? We can go to the next slide. Why is this important for me to walk through with you all how the attachment injury shows up? Because there is an impact. Right? So what we know for sure is that it causes an unhealthy dependency. Oftentimes it means that you are not communicating clearly what you need. It means that there's a lack of self-awareness. And remember, if you can't name it, you can't change it. And so self-awareness is the first conversation that we are introducing when we're talking about emotional intelligence. We have to know what's happening in our body. We have to be able to name our feelings. We have to be able to name our needs. You can go to the next slide. And so there's a codependency piece that shows up. Working through codependency takes a lot of awareness, my friends. Codependency is when you find yourself overly relying on another person to meet your emotional needs or to feel good about yourself. Right. And so it's when you might prioritize someone else's needs over your own to the point that you lose sight of your own well being. So I'm not asking you to be selfish. I'm asking you to be aware. You get to show up, but you also get to ask yourself, do I have capacity to show up in the way that does not cause me to hurt myself? So this is us being caught up in someone else's spiral, their anxiety spiral. It means that we are trying our very best to unlearn unhealthy boundaries. We are trying to unlearn ways that we have not been kind to ourselves. One of the most things you can practice, one of the most important things you can practice in this life is to observe every interaction and decide whether the information is asking you to look closely at yourself and own something, or to look closely at yourself and acknowledge that it's not about you. And that is a very, very tough conversation. It's definitely a tough conversation. I don't know who's in the audience, but it's definitely a tough conversation for women. To not own everyone's issue is a struggle. And what I would want you to do before we go into the fixing mode is to see how often it shows up. How often are you trying to control the outcome of someone else's narrative? And can we shift that energy to you? Can we make you the star in your own life? Okay, next slide, please. And so when we begin to really talk about attachment, what we're really talking about is boundaries. And I'm always so intrigued by some of the narrative and content that I see on boundaries from social media. I'm not like a real big social media person, but when I go on there, I'm like, oh my gosh, what are we teaching our friends out here in the internet world? So I want to give you guys a crash course in understanding your needs. We can go to the next slide. First, we are talking about rules of engagement. When we talk about boundaries, we're also talking about integrity. We're talking about your ability to make and keep the promises that you have set for yourself. And so what I want you to ask yourself, and what I would love for us to just pause for a second, this is going to be a 30-second pause, but I want you to ask yourself, what promises have I made to myself that I'm not keeping? What promises have I made to myself that I'm not keeping? Okay. Just want you to sit with it. I want you to scan all domains of your life: romantic, personal, professionally, as a mother, as a friend, as a thriving professional, as a person caring for yourself and nurturing yourself. What promises have you made to yourself that you're not keeping? You can go to the next slide. Because what we're really talking about is the rules of engagement. We're talking about how you show up for yourself. And when I introduce rules of engagement, I'm referring to how we stand up for our space in the world. We're redefining our rules of engagement by creating our own resilient story. So what does that mean? It means that we're learning the foundational principles for honoring our values through boundaries. Boundaries are the essential building blocks for healthy relationships. Boundaries are how we operate in the world. They are our everyday expressions of consent. They represent the space in which we navigate relationships and communities. Boundaries protect you. Now, you can go to the next slide. What I'm going to introduce is that boundaries are usually pretty flexible, you all. And I know it's like, I must have a boundary. I must have a boundary. I hear you. What we want to know is that, what I want you all to know is that when we're talking about rigid boundaries, this is a space where most things don't get through. There's no space for negotiation. There's no space for compromise. And there are times when rigid boundaries are acceptable, especially if your safety is being called into question. But most of the time, they're not rigid. Whenever there is a conversation within yourself where it is all or nothing, when there's this very polarized black and white conversation happening, then your stress response is active. And I want you to pause. We live in the middle, you all. We live in the gray. We live in the both and. And so if you are rigid in your boundaries and your safety is not being called into question, I want you to ask yourself why. Okay. I also want to know if you are an avoidant personality, because rigid often shows up in the avoidant personality injury. I want us to be clear that most of us will operate on a continuum of these boundaries, depending on the person, depending on the time, depending on the experience, depending on how you're showing up energetically, your capacity. And so when we talk about permeable boundaries, it means everything gets through. This is where people pleasers live, right? And so I think that people pleasers get a bad rap. So I want to be crystal clear about how I feel about people pleasers. We want people in the world that care about you, that care about your experience, that want to go above and beyond to love you, to show up for you. We just don't want it to be to your detriment. Right. And so that is the difference between showing up and honoring your yes and no and people pleasing and having permeable boundaries. And then we're talking flexible boundaries. And this is the gold standard of boundaries. This is flexibility. It allows you to listen to your internal voice. It allows you to honor your yes and no. It allows you to make the best decision based on what's presenting right now and what's best for your growth and what's best for your evolution. And so I want you to ask yourself one question. We're going into the holiday season. We're trying to honor our yeses. We're trying to be clear about our nos. In each moment to moment experience, if you're having trouble, I want you to ask yourself first, how do I feel? How do I feel right now? Am I tired? Am I trying to push through? Do I have to push through? Because there are certain experiences and obligatory moments where you do have to push through, but that's not every moment, right? So how do I feel and what's best? What's best based on the presentation right now? I want you all to consider what boundaries are rigid and is that necessary? I want you to ask yourself which boundaries are too permeable and how can I care for myself differently? And I want you to ask yourself, what can I do to have flexible boundaries depending on what's presenting in my moment to moment experience? Okay. I'm hopeful that it's landing for you all. We can go to the next one, Hamza. And so what am I saying to you? I want you to understand why it's important for us to define the boundaries because boundaries have inputs and outputs, right? So when we talk about healthy boundaries, it means that you are connected and protected. You feel safe in your nervous system. You're able to move through life. You're able to be happy. You're able to connect to joy. And so the input for a healthy boundary means that we can connect with others while holding on to ourselves. So we're not shape-shifting. We're not doing things to our detriment. And that means your output, what you're giving out is we're able to express our opinions, our perspectives. We feel respected. We respect the viewpoint of others. We allow people to have their voice. We're not trying to control. What happens with a permeable boundary, you are connected, but you're not protected, right? So you're doing everything that you can do to be connected, but you don't feel protected. And so what happens is that input is we absorb or we take on that which is not ours. Okay. And so I want you to ask yourself, where are my boundaries permeable? How do I know when my boundaries are permeable? Because I've taken it all. It's not mine. It does not exist. It's not mine to take, but I've taken it all on. Okay. And what happens, the output is we intrude into that which is not ours. We fix what's not ours. We try to control what is not ours. And what it does is it puts undue stress on our life, on our relationships. We feel overwhelmed. Okay. And when we talk about a rigid boundary, we're protected. So we're protecting ourselves, but we're not connected. We are isolated. We're pushing people away. We don't have quality relationships that fill us up. We're not connected to the human experience. And so what happens is your input, your internal experience is we block the input of others. We're not getting the good stuff, you all. And then the output is we restrain ourselves or we hold others back from getting to know us. And so that usually presents as resentment or isolation. We start to feel lonely. So we're in a room full of people, but we still feel alone. Okay, so I want you all to consider what are your inputs? What are your outputs? How are your boundaries showing up across all domains of your life? We can go to the next slide. And so I'm a very practical therapist. And so the practicality of how do I integrate the science of healing into my everyday life? I want you all to know, I want you to be aware of when it shows up. So how do I know that my boundaries are becoming unhealthy? One, we're going from feeling good before an interaction or moment to feeling numb, tense, or stressed or irritable. This is the holiday with some people's family. So it's like we want to get ourselves very excited about the moment, but we know when we get there, it's going to take a lot for me to tolerate this experience. If that is the case for you, I want you to already game plan what it looks like for you to be in this space. I want you to know that we don't have to stay for the full event. Mm-mm. Most of the time, unless it is an event that I have personally planned in my mind, I already know what time I'm exiting. So I'm going, I'm showing up, I'm doing the things, and then guess what I'm doing? I'm protecting myself. If there is a person that I have to interact with that I know is going to activate me, I already have a script for that person in my head. I want you to know that it's okay to rehearse hard things. We rehearse hard things any other time. We rehearse before a job interview. We rehearse before a big presentation. And when it comes to us having to navigate these very complex and dynamic relationships, I also want us to know that it's okay to rehearse. I want you to know that if you want to discontinue the interaction and change the situation, fix a problem, or stop feeling an emotion, I need you to pause, because it means that there is a boundary that is not centered and integrated. If you feel responsible for someone else's experience, I want you to pause. It means that we are not practicing healthy integrated boundaries. That is their life. That is their world. And there's another thing that I talk about a lot in workshops or in my individual practice. It's not your job to police the universe, but what we often rob people of is their ability to experience what their journey is supposed to offer to them. So when you come in and you fix it, it doesn't allow them to have that individual experience. And I want you to let them have that individual experience, right? So we can ask, what do you need to be supported? But that doesn't mean that we're rushing right in to fix it for them. I want you to know, if you're feeling deeply impacted by something that only impacts you indirectly or marginally, then I'm asking you why. Sometimes it matters. Sometimes, if we're talking about the greater societal influences, then it will matter. But if you're in the holiday party and someone over there has a disagreement in a conversation that has nothing to do with you, I want you to ask why you're so impacted by it. I want you to ask, have you inserted yourself in space that's stealing your joy, that's taking your energy? And finally, if you're taking on someone else's struggle as if it's your own, right? Like, we get to be empathetic. We get to show up for people. I am a person that lives in love. I'm asking myself, what would love do? What would love say? How would love behave? Love is a core value of mine, but I have to love myself first, right? And so if you're allowing you to be the focal point and you're extending that love out, then we're asking, am I taking on someone's struggle? And do I have capacity to do it? Right? And so here's what we're coming. You can go to the next slide. Here's what we're daring to do in the boundaries conversation. Daring to set boundaries is about having the courage to love yourself, even when we risk disappointing others. Okay, I just want to say that again. Because if you're going to set a boundary, if you're going to honor your yes and no, then you're going to disappoint someone, my friends. Daring to set your boundary is about having the courage to love yourself, even at the risk of disappointing others. Okay, I'm going to keep going. I want you to ask yourself, where do you struggle to set boundaries? As you go into the holiday season, as you begin to interact with a lot of different personalities, you can go to the next slide. Where do you struggle to set your boundaries? Where do you struggle? Let's go ahead and rehearse the future conversations that we're going to have, the future interactions that we're going to have. Where do you struggle to set your boundaries? Who makes it hard for you? The mother-daughter conversation shows up a lot in practice when we're talking about struggling to set boundaries. Your children, they show up in this space when we're talking about struggling to set boundaries. I want you to know that you model integration for your children when you're honest with them about your internal experience. Hey, baby, I'm tired tonight. Everybody's going to have to figure out dinner for themselves. Mom had a long day. I'm going to rest for a second, right? Because I want you to think about your lived experience. If you are a millennial or beyond, or above, like, so you are a boomer, who taught you how to rest? We know how to work. We know how to work well, but who taught you how to rest? Who taught you how to care for yourself? Who taught you how to pace yourself, how to have slow yeses, how to have slow no's, how to have lazy Sundays? We don't know. Lazy is a problem. You have to get up, you have to do something. And so as we begin to, one, understand that that's no longer adaptive for us in this world, we're also saying, what am I going to do differently? We can go to the next slide. And then when you think about struggling to set your boundaries, we're also saying, well, what makes it hard to set that boundaries? Right? So there's some level of constraint that shows up. There's a block, there's a barrier, there's hierarchy, there's cultural considerations. We've always done this in our family. This is how we've always been. Sure. But do we want to continue to make that agreement? Is there something that we can unlearn? Is there a better way for us to move forward that honors me in the experience? Can I better respect myself? Can I better respect you? Right? And so I want you all to know that it's okay to say no. It's okay to honor your yes, depending on your energy level, and your no, depending on what no longer serves you. We can go to the next slide. And so, on this journey of exploration, we're working to understand the cycle and what drives it. So, once we can name it, remember, we can change it. If you can't name it, you can't change it. And we are going to begin to unlearn these behavior patterns that no longer serve us so that we can build relationships that feel safer and more fulfilling. Here's a big one that always comes up for me. Like, what am I supposed to do in these families that are toxic as I'm trying to evolve myself? And I'm a therapist, so I meet you where you are. I don't have a yes or no for you. I'm following your lead. So if you feel like it's too toxic, then yes, you should remove people from your life who are abusive, exceedingly difficult, and full of way too much negativity. But I'm also a therapist. And so I'm looking for the both and in the situation. And I'm asking myself, where are you avoiding the conversation? Where's your opportunity to evolve? Where's the opportunity for you to grow your emotional intelligence, for you to build and widen that window of tolerance? And so at the same time, what I want you to consider is, if you're removing people from your life when there is a conflict, always when there's a conflict, this will encourage the pattern of running away. Hey, avoidance. Right? And so I want us to consider, what do we really want? Who do we really want to be? And how can we move forward unlearning these behavior patterns that no longer serve us so we can get closer to the best version of ourselves? We can go to the next slide. And so if you all are able to just kind of take a picture of this, if we were doing a full workshop, we will go through this. But what I want you to understand is there is an origin to why you do what you do. And most of the time, this origin lives in your first family. And I will send this to Dr. Jada so that she can send it back out. But I want you, as you are questioning your personal boundaries, as you are asking yourself what you need, I want you to consider how was consent honored for you? Did you have voice? Could you say no growing up? Could you have a difference of opinion in your family? And if that wasn't the case, how is that showing up in your work? How is that showing up in your personal relationships? Do you feel like you can't have a voice now? Right? How were boundaries and consent modeled for you? What messages did you learn about what it means to own your voice, own your yes, own your no? And so I want us to be able to ask these questions, one, because I want to be able to honor your lived experience. There's a reason why you are doing what you're doing, why you are behaving the way you're behaving, why you are protecting yourself the way you're protecting yourself. And then what we're also asking is it still how I want to move through my life? And so with emotional intelligence, we're asking, have you ever been consumed by an intense emotion? Is it hard for you to listen? Is it hard for you to think? Are your emotions hijacked in that moment? That means your stress response is active. And usually that stress response is active from a historical memory from your past. And so I want you to explore it. We can go to the next slide. So what am I asking you all to do? I'm asking you to create and maintain healthy boundaries. How do we do it? We name, we connect, we choose. Okay. So first, we're naming the pattern. What's my energy? What's happening? Right? What's their energy? What's happening? Because there are certain people that you're willing to go above and beyond for because the reciprocity is there. So you're tired, but you're going to do it anyway because guess what? They show up for you and you want to show up for them. because they love you, you want to love them. And that's where that flexible boundary comes in. I'm tired, but I'm going to just push myself a little longer because this person deserves it. But I want you to be able to name your feelings. Like, how does it feel to say yes? Do you feel relaxed in your yes? Do you feel tensed in your yes? How do you feel after you say no? After you are able to push through the guilt, because guilt will show up. How do you feel on the other side of that guilt? Do you feel relaxed? Do you feel rested? Do you feel centered? Do you feel like that was the right decision? And if you are feeling like it's not the right decision, you feel tense in your shoulders, you feel uneasy in your stomach, are you willing to make a different decision? The name, connect, choose process can help you disentangle yourself from a situation where unhealthy boundaries are present. It helps you release that which does not belong to you so you can claim what is yours. Okay, we can go to the next slide. What does it mean to reclaim your voice? Once we identify our values, we can begin to make value-based decisions. I share with you all that I'm a love-based person. So most of the time I'm asking myself, what would love do? And what happens is most of our reactivity is a buildup of all those times we were not prioritized, all the times we did not stand up for ourselves, we did not use our voice, and we did not express our emotions. So it feels like it's this one moment in this one person, but really it's a lifetime of you not standing up for yourself and you not asserting your voice. And so together we are learning to name what we need. We're learning to clarify what no longer aligns with who we are. And we're learning to grow into a more evolved version of ourselves. And so we're exploring our core values and we're learning to reclaim our voice. We're learning to honor our yes and no. And so I'm going to constantly remind you, and I have 2 more sessions with you all, so we'll be talking about this, that healing doesn't mean that we have to do everything at once. The research supports that change doesn't happen at the macro level, you all. It happens with small, consistent changes in our everyday life. It starts with awareness once we name it. And what you need is the tools to address these challenges in a way that is integrated and healthy. And so the reason why I'm asking you not to jump in and begin to fix it is because first we have to be aware. So I would love for you all to take this next week to just learn more about yourself, to get curious about yourself. Okay. How do you feel with your yes? How do you feel with your no? We can go to the next slide. And I want you all to remember that nothing changes if nothing changes. So when we are accepting healing as a part of our everyday practice, what we're saying is, I want to do something different. I don't like how this is presenting for me presently. So I'm going to do something different. I want you to know that it's okay for you to focus on progress, not perfection. I want you to know that it's okay for you to communicate your feelings and desires. I want you to know that it's okay to pay more attention to where you're putting your time and energy. And if that feels good to you, it's okay to not have everything figured out. Why? Why would we feel like we have to have everything figured out? It's okay to start with gratitude and retrain your brain to appreciate the small pops of joy. If you are uncertain, if you are feeling low, if you begin and end your day with gratitude, the research supports that it will give you that dopamine boost, that those good hormones to be able to get you out of that funk. Try gratitude. And it's okay to focus on the things that are within your control. If you feel anxious, I would love for you to just do a brain dump. We're going to start with it next week. I want you to list every single thing that you're worried about. And then I want you to cross off the things that are no longer serving you, that you have no control over. Okay. I am so excited to continue this conversation with you all. I definitely want to be able to ask questions. I'm going to hang on just in case you have questions. I hope that was helpful. I hope it was useful. I hope that you're going to care for yourself as we go into the holiday season. I hope that you're going to be gentle with yourself as we process through grief and loss. And most importantly, if you don't remember anything else when you are feeling stressed, I want you to just breathe. Center yourself. Remember that you have everything that you need. You are capable. You are safe. And then go on to the next moment. That's all I got tonight, you guys.
Janae, how did that feel? Oh my goodness. You deposited so much food for thought, so much insight, so I think a lot of clarity. Boy, you hit it tonight. How did that feel? How did you feel with delivering to the audience at such a critical time during the year? Like, how do we take some of the things that we have experienced for many, many years around the holidays and then choose a different experience for this year? So, how did that feel for you?
Oh, I live for it. It's always interesting at this time of year because it's complex, right? It's dynamic. So you if you are a professional, you are closing out the fourth quarter and you're just tired. I always want to remind people that it makes sense that at the end of the year you're just tired, right? And so you spent the whole year doing things at the highest level, and then you're nursing grief and loss, and we just came off of a really
Yeah.
charged election cycle, right? And so we're nursing we what we need to be able to get through this moment. And then we're dealing with the holidays and we're dealing with family and we are dealing with friends and we're trying to show up. And so the loud emotions are the ones that I really want you to pay attention to. So if
Mhm.
worry is loud, I want you to try to center on that worry and try to ask yourself, what do I need to feel better? What do I need to break this big thing into smaller pieces so I can make it more manageable? We're just trying to make life a little bit more digestible. And so I love having the conversation about boundaries and attachment. Not only is it a focal point in my practice, but it's also what we're talking about when we're asking you to consider building a stronger regulated experience in life. So this is just emotional regulation, and so I'm hopeful that people took good stuff from it.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I'm sure. I mean, it was very potent and very rich, and I think it's so helpful to sometimes just understand where things come from and to know that there are options. There's the choosing. So we got a couple of questions tonight. So I'm going to toss them out there and maybe we can bounce them around and give some good feedback. One of the questions for the registrants tonight was how do you avoid self-sabotage? And specifically how to avoid sabotage not only from self but also from others, whether it's with food or overall comments, that when we're in these circles and people have had given themselves permission to
Mhm.
say what they want to say,
Sure.
when they want to say it, how they want to say it, in front of who they want to say it.
Yeah.
How can we avoid sabotage from self and avoid sabotage from others.
I love that. I think I hear the question as, how do I not lose myself in that moment? I think that's what I hear when I hear self sabotage. Okay. So, one of the things that I want to know, just as a general rule, from a self sabotage perspective, what comes up immediately is when we are not honoring our yes and our no, then for me, that is self sabotage, right? But the bigger question is, we're asking ourselves, who do I want to be in my moment to moment experience? So, this has less to do with the person and how they're showing up in the world, because what I hear is they're going through their own individual trauma, their own individual stress cycle, they're having their own internal experience. So how do I not own that? How do I not take that on? How do I protect myself in this moment? I always talk about, like, what does it look like? So my single high performing women, whenever they walk in a room, someone is always asking them, why you don't have a boyfriend? What's wrong with you? Or when you get married, right? So it's a conversation. They're ready for it, and they are, and it's disarming for them oftentimes, and it makes their defenses go up. And I like, for before we walk into that space, I want to ask them, like, well, who do you want to be? Are you happily single? Because if you are happily single, then you get to say, I'm happily single. How are you? Right. But if you're having difficulties internally with who you are in the world, then that conversation is internal conversation first. We have to ground you in you, so that you don't feel so offended. You don't feel so activated. You don't feel so triggered when other people are showing up as them, because we can't control them. And so you get to bow out gracefully. You get to not interact within toxic situations that do not bring out the best version of yourself. You get to say, you know what? I appreciate you asking that, but it's not really helpful for me. So I'm going to go over here. Or how are you? Or let's talk about something else. You get to say whatever you want to say that protects yourself in that moment. But most importantly, it's less about them and more about how you're feeling about yourself. And I want you to be grounded and confident in who you are. That's the conversation.
I love that. I love that. And just to add to that, I think part of what I heard in the question is, how do I not self sabotage myself when I am now experiencing my buttons being pushed in stress
Yeah.
mode, um, and my usual go to for self soothing, maybe food or alcohol or binging or of different types. Like, how do I avoid self, not avoid, but
I
what
hear
can
you.
I do
Hmm. I hear you.
to come back from the deep?
I think what I would want to offer everyone first is just grace. Like, it's really important for me, for you to recognize that however you, whatever is presenting in your world that is protecting you from the hurt is a thing, and it is your self-protective strategy. Right. And so what I would want us to do is pause. Let's take the food, for instance. I need comfort calories. Like, so I'm in a moment, and I am feeling like this one food, this is my jelly beans. My jelly beans are going to make me feel better. I'm a therapist. I am not a doctor.
Mhm.
So for me, I'm like, okay, well, why can't we eat a few jelly beans? Why we got it? What is deprivation? What are we doing out here? Like, if you are saying I'm going through a tough time and I want a couple of jelly beans, then I'm like, okay, well, what does it mean to have a few jelly beans and not all the jelly beans?
Mhm.
Right. So I want you to be okay with knowing that that request from your body is your body asking you for comfort, that there is something that is activating you that makes you feel like I need to protect myself, and that is your normal behavior pattern for protection. So here's the thing: if there's awareness in the conversation, right? So I know that I am stressed, and comfort calories has been my normal behavioral go-to pattern. We get to pause in that moment and say, is that best? Does that support the highest version of me? And does it support my most evolved self? And if not, what can I do differently? So you can't change the behavior without putting something in place. So if normally I would go and I would eat the jelly beans because jelly beans are good and they make me feel good, what am I going to do in place of that? And it has to be sustainable, you all. Let me tell you. So I've been doing Pilates because I love Pilates, but all my friends do yoga. So I was trying to do yoga, but yoga wasn't working for me. And so I could not sustain yoga. I did not like it. You're not going to be able to sustain what you don't like. And so when we're talking about what are we going to put in place to shift that behavior pattern and create a new neural pathway, it has to be something that we like or like enough. Okay. It's not going to be the jelly beans, but it will shift that momentum enough for us to go to a different option. How does that
That's
feel? That
good. That's good. That's good. I think it's. I heard you say grace. I heard you say self awareness. I heard you say ask a couple of questions. I asked you. I heard you say choose what's best for you now and what's aligned with your ultimate goals. So I heard that there's. I think you're still at the center. That's what I heard. Is
yeah.
that you're still at the center of this, in some cases dialogue, maybe at certain times it feels like a monologue, but you're at the center of this narrative. I have one last question and we're going to wrap it up. We did good work tonight. I
Sure.
hope that those of you who will get the replay still put your comments out there, put your questions out there, give us some feedback. We're grooming this channel to really be an active, engaging channel to offer you some kind of on demand, when I feel like it, when I need it, when I have time, self development, personal development. And so I want you to definitely give us feedback and give us comments because that will really matter. The other question that we have, and it's the last one, is how do you approach setting healthy boundaries, which you taught us about, that
Mhm.
prioritize self care without appearing to be selfish?
It's always a thing, right? Because to care for yourself means, again, as I noted, that you might have to disappoint someone else. And so I want us to ask ourselves what we really, really want. What do you really, really, really want? And then how do you map that best case scenario? And so there's this conversation that underscores boundaries where it has to be this sweeping yes or this sweeping no, and that's not the way it works. We get to decide in our moment to moment experience what works best for us based on who we believe ourselves to be and what we want. And so, for instance, if one of my individual personal micro goals is that I'm going to get through the holiday without binging on my favorite dessert, what
Mhm.
I really, really want is, it has nothing to do with the dessert, you all. What it has to do is the discipline that exists on the inside of you and you being able to ride those intense waves onto the other side so that you can get to your goal. And so within that space, you're asking yourself, if this is what I want to do, I want to have more self-discipline so that I can care for myself, nurture myself with foods that are going to help me grow into the best version of myself. What am I willing to sacrifice? Right. So what do I need to stop? What do I need to start? What do I need to continue? So
Mhm.
that means that I may need to stop. For me, it would be I would need to stop having the big cake from a piece of cake, the whole full cake in my house where I could keep going back and slicing off the cake throughout the whole holiday. I might just need the one slice of cake if this is
Mhm.
my goal. For me, I have a whole list in front of me of things that I need to complete before the end of the year. What I had to do was go back and ask myself, but realistically, what's not going to get done? Right. And so we're setting realistic expectations for ourselves so that we don't feel like we are fundamentally failing at life when we've already set these unrealistic goals, but we need to start at the micro level and work ourselves up.
Got it. Got it.
Okay.
Got it. That is so rich. I want to thank you for taking the time to be in community with us and to really frame some thoughts, some conversations, some curiosity. I love that word that you use. Thank you for framing that tonight. It doesn't end here, friends. This is just the beginning. This is something that you may find that you need to refer back to. You may have to save some points, bookmark it, save to watch later, create some clips for yourself. This was so potent, and from wherever you are in your journey, I'm sure that there was something said tonight that is noteworthy. So I hope you got your journals out. we were tagging you in the comments saying, pull out your journals. If you did not complete your attachment quiz, it's not too late. The link will be sent to you. The QR code will be sent to you so that you can complete that. These are things that are tough, but being aware and knowing is so much better than being in the dark. It's better for you and it's better for everyone connected to you. So definitely make sure that you get that. We're sending emails out as well so that if you missed it, we're just hitting some highlights. Feel free to share this with somebody. Share this link. Y'all share a lot of stuff. I know, sharing a lot of stuff, all the jokes, the funnies, the memes. Share some stuff that's going to really make a difference during this holiday season. I want to thank you and invite you to return on next Thursday, December 18th. Janae and I will be right here giving you more tips on how to navigate these last 3 weeks, the last of this year, 2024, and how we're going to just bust the door open on 2025. Thank
Yes,
you
ma'am.
for joining us. This is it. Bye for
See you.
now.